Just waiting for the live stream to get all booted up here. Well, good morning. This week's prophecy update I've titled New World Disorder Continued, because I think I've used that title before and I don't want to repeat myself, so I put the CONT there at the end to be a little bit on the creative side. We talk every week about the convergence of events, and this week was, from my perspective, was particularly difficult to prepare in the sense that there was so much going on. And I apologize to people who watch if I'm not always perfectly organized. Someone suggested that maybe I could practice this a few times before I give it, and I'm not sure how I practice it walking from back there up to here, because that's when it's finished, is when I'm sitting in the back there. And I do work sometimes, like this week, 60 or more hours a week at my law practice, so time is at a premium, and just sorting through all of the things that were going on this week was pretty incredible. So I'm going to touch on a few things. I'm going to try to tie in a verse, a couple verses, because there's some things that I see going on in the prophecy community that, as people look at passages and things, there are certain things and assumptions that just kind of get built into what we talk about. For example, I was just having a discussion with someone about the Great Tribulation. Now, some people, a lot of people, even learned scholars, will refer to the entire 70th week of 7 years as the Great Tribulation. And my question always is, where do you get that from Scripture? Because the only time I've seen anyone use the term Great Tribulation was Jesus in Matthew 24:22. And he talks about there's the abomination of desolation. If you're on the roof, pray that, if you're on the rooftop, just take the outside stairs, flee when you see that happen. And then what does he say? Then shall be great tribulation. So my point is, sometime after the midpoint is when the great tribulation starts, but there's this tendency to continually to expand all of these periods described in the 70th week out to fill up the entire 70th week. And I think we need to be very careful with that. The wrath of God gets expanded out, the tribulation gets expanded out, the day of the Lord gets expanded out, even though there are clear markers as to when a lot of those events start in Scripture. And I'm not going to go into all of them today. But so I just want to bring up one verse. As I was looking at things, I think I actually saw some things I had not seen before, and so I'll share that when we get to that point in a middle bit. So today we're going to focus a lot on the Middle East and Europe and what's going on in the world, because that's very significant. Of course, all Bible prophecy ultimately centers around the revelation of Jesus Christ and the dealing with the nation of Israel in the end times. One of the things that we see this week is that the Fed decided that they were going to. It was a very interesting thing that Janet Yellen did the other day, the head of the Federal Reserve, when she talked about why they're not going to raise interest rates that much. Now, you need to understand, the Fed, since 2008, has dumped trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars into stimulus. All over the world, central banks have been printing money like crazy, and the economies are not growing. In fact, commodity prices are going, and I think you could make a case that we're really at the beginnings of or into a depression because of the collapse in commodity prices. And that probably will only continue for a while. I saw an interesting thing somebody had done. Of course, it's on the internet, so it's got to be true, right? And they'd gone out. They had a 10-ounce bar of silver and a pile of Hershey chocolate bars. And they went up to person after person after person and said, hey, which would you rather have, the bar of silver or the chocolate bar? Now, how many people do you think took at least, now they could have edited out all the ones that took it, but how many do you think took the bar of silver in that video? Not a single one. I mean, chocolate's great, okay, folks? But this thing had almonds, these bars had almonds in it, and, you know, that would make it even easier in my book, but because I'm not a big nuts guy, as people know. First time I met my mother-in-law, she had made a pecan pie. I don't like pecan pie even a little teeny tiny bit. And what do? I'm trying to impress her. So I forced it down, and I mean I forced it down. And of course, what did she do? As she did till the day she died. Oh, I see you're done, John. Would you like another piece? And I did, and I hadn't decided. And I said, even though I hadn't decided to go to law school, this was a marker that maybe I might be able to make it in law school. Oh no, Mrs. Walters, that's just so rich. I don't think I could eat another piece. And I was home free for a while. But I finally told her, I said, look, don't even offer it from now on. Eventually we got to the point where we could be directly honest with each other and instead of subtly diplomatic. Well, so anyway, this economy thing, separate and part with all the hype about Shemitah and all the stuff that we've been hearing about, even without this stuff, this is significant things that are happening economically around the world. As debt loads rise, in California, which has some of the highest public pensions in the world, the public unions are, and now some of the people in the government are saying, hey, we need to raise the pensions because that'll stimulate the economy. Giving everybody gold bars would stimulate the economy too, I suppose, but they're not going to do that. So the whole system is just crazy. It's broken. And every expert that I see that's really honest, there are people that are wildly optimistic. The stock market's gone up. It's always going to go up. That's never happened in history. Eventually there's a correction, and sometimes it involves a major crash. And it appears that the next time it happens, I don't have a date. I'm not setting a date. I'm just saying, as everybody that I'm talking to says, that it will happen. And that sets up, I believe, given the framework of everything else that's going on in the world, that sets up a world leader to take control and to do his business. We call that the Antichrist. But another thing that's going on is this thing in California is just absolutely stunning. These fires up around Sonoma and Sacramento. I think it's 70, 80,000 acres have burned now. It's a significant amount of area just in this one valley fire. That doesn't include all the other fires that we've dealt with in Washington and everything. Here's just a short video. Look at this news crew driving through the fire in California.
Traveling out of Middletown, we could see flames in the distance. But quickly, without warning, we faced a tunnel of fire.
This fire has burned for several miles, and it's still so intense. And there's so much brush in front of us, it looks like it's never going to end.
It was too dangerous to turn back. Burning debris was falling on the road. You could hear the fury and feel the intensity.
Crews who are just in front of us tell us these flames are shooting at 40, 50 miles an hour in some places. And even here in the vehicle, you can feel the heat.
Everything became a blowtorch, the inferno leaping the road.
Mother Nature took over.
No controlling it.
No controlling it.
Some fire crews pressed forward. We sought a safety zone with veteran firefighters like Bill Vieira.
It sounds like that sucking sound that people describe it as a jet plane. So it's just pulling in air, just consuming the fuel.
Fire here is able to create its own weather. It's shooting embers into the air, but it's also the intense heat. And this is what we see every few feet. Another inferno getting set to take off.
Raining embers sent firefighters scrambling, a vehicle catching fire. These are the epic conditions crews now face every day.
And tonight, another extreme. We have had heavy rain here for the last several hours. That's certainly good news for this blaze. As for the flank of the fire that we were covering, it burned itself out, moving into an area that already had a burn scar. Lester, 9 times out of 10, we are following fire. This time, it came to us.
Well, you really showed us what it's all about and what they face out there. Miguel, thanks very much.
Well, that's an indicator, and there's actually a editorial, I think it was in the New York Times yesterday, that even major rains this year won't solve California's drought problem. They are really in a desperate situation for another couple of years. Now, I was just out there, and everything seems to be pretty normal, but in Southern California where I was, they have not yet hit their big fire season. That's coming here pretty soon. Well, England a lot of times leads the way in what happens there eventually comes here. For example, as the church in England, not the Church of England, but the evangelical church in England went into severe decline, and some of the things that started to come in to the church there, eventually they worked their way over here. And now England, of course, we know has a significant problem with Islam as immigrants have moved in there. And it's not going to necessarily get better. One of the things that England is trying to do is how do we deal with these radical preachers? And I understand the desire to deal with that issue, but one of the things that they've now proposed, and the Telegraph was able to get a hold of, was a register for faith leaders. And it says this: imams, priests, and rabbis, and other religious figures will have to enroll in a national register of faith leaders and be subject to government-specified training and security checks in the Home Office's latest action on extremism. The highly controversial proposal appears in a leaked draft of the government's new counter-extremism strategy, seen by the Sunday Telegraph, which goes substantially further than previous versions of the document. Registration will be compulsory for all faith leaders who wish to work with the public sector, including universities, the document says. In practice, most faith leaders will have some dealings with the public sector, and the requirement will cover the great majority. They then go on to talk about 2 British citizens who were killed in drone attacks. And just like there's people in the United States who are upset when American citizens go overseas and they're killed, summarily executed in drone attacks in a foreign land, people are upset about that. They say it's not fair, they should be entitled to a fair trial, a jury trial, and all that stuff. But then the other side of it is, hey, we're at war. That's what happens in wars. People get killed, and you're in the war zone, and you're doing the wrong things, you're at risk. So it talks about here, it is believed that Riyad Khan, 21 from Cardiff in England, the main target of the drone attack, was radicalized at the Welsh city's Al-Manar Mosque. And then it says this: until 2013, the mosque in-house preacher Ali Hamuda, who believes that music is a sickness, was allowed into Cathays High School, one of the schools attended by Khan, to run lunchtime sessions with students, teaching, among other things, that music and free mixing between men and women were not permitted in Islam. In other words, this imam was allowed to go into the public schools and teach Sharia law and Islam to the students at lunchtime. And then we wonder why they have a problem. I don't think you need a registry. I think you need to deal with the problem. You know who these extreme guys are. Don't let them into the schools. Well, that's religious discrimination. No, it's being wise, I think. So it says here, and then they say how they're going to implement this. The strategy states that local people will be given a new extremism community trigger, a right to demand action when they feel the police and Crown Prosecution Service are not investigating and prosecuting people who have committed hate crime and other extremism-related offenses. And so the problem is, good evangelical preachers in England are going to get caught up in this and get charged with hate crimes. That's what's going to happen. And there's going to be persecution as a result of it. So it's sort of like we talk about the mark of the beast. and I've said for a lot of years, if the mark of the beast is a chip in your hand to buy things with, it will be a good idea when it comes. I mean, look, how many of you go to the store and you go to pay and they go, do you have your loyalty card? And you pull out, you're fumbling through 50 loyalty cards that you're carrying around now? 8 credit cards, 50 loyalty cards, and it's like, sometimes I say, why didn't you just put a barcode on my forehead and scan me and everything, have all my information there? Because it'll be a good idea if that's the way it unfolds. I'm not certain that that's exact way. It's certainly one of the possibilities of the way that it will unfold. And nobody's going to pick me up and scam me, I know that, so use one of those little trigger things. Well, this week at the White House, we have a convergence of some things. On the 23rd, a date that everybody says is really significant, the Pope is going to go to the White House. And this was reported, I first saw it on a thing, I think it's called Right Wing News or something like that, but I found it on U.S. News, which is hardly a right-wing publication, and it says this: cross-section of U.S. religious life to welcome Pope, including evangelicals and gay Catholics. Among those who have confirmed their attendance at the White House reception are the Reverend Joel Hunter, an evangelical megachurch pastor from Florida, Orlando, Florida, who is a confidant of Obama on spiritual matters. The Reverend Leith Anderson, president of the National Association of Evangelicals, which represents about 40 conservative Christian denominations, and the Reverend Samuel Rodriguez, president of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, a major U.S. Latino evangelical group that, along with the U.S. Roman Catholic bishops, has pressed lawmakers for immigration reform. Also in the audience will be Episcopal Bishop Gene Robinson, the first openly gay Anglican bishop, who's now a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. So you see, he was an Episcopal bishop, but he went to the Center for American Progress. Why? Because his real religion wasn't Christianity or anything remotely resembling Christianity. His religion was leftism. And leftism is a very powerful religion. And then they also have Sister Simone Campbell, executive director of the Catholic Social Justice Lobby Network, and a leader of the Nuns on the Bus advocacy tours. They also have some gay Catholics, bloggers that are coming. It's supposed to be a big crowd at the White House. And look, I'm glad for all the so-called evangelicals that are going there. Make a note of them, and then don't pay any attention to them anymore because they've marked themselves out. Now, the Catholic Church has gotten wind of who's on the invite list, and they don't like it. Actually, it was reported in the Wall Street Journal the other day that the Vatican has protested all these people that are transgender, gay, bisexual, all the, everybody under the sun. So it shows up a couple things. One, Obama's agenda is the thing that he pursues the most. And he doesn't care who it offends. So why should we be worried about if he's offended by what we say? Or like in the news conference the other day when somebody accused him of being a Muslim, and now everybody's all over Donald Trump because he didn't have the courtesy to correct the guy. Well, Obama's a big boy. He can correct the record, right? He has a bully pulpit. Do you think he has any trouble getting on TV, really? So he can correct the record if he wants. But what this shows is that President Obama's agenda is not religion. It's leftism. It's a very powerful religion. In fact, people who are involved in leftism, it will overwhelm, I submit to you, their Christianity. Now, we know this week, like I said, there's so many things that I could put up there. I could put up there Bernie Sanders going to Liberty University. Bernie Sanders is a radical Marxist, socialist, whatever you want to call it. I mean, everybody wants to say, well, he's not really a communist. Well, listen, at some point they sort of converge and the end result is the same. And so Bernie Sanders went there, and I I wrote some things on Facebook about it because I was upset by that. And when he got up there, he was cheered. When he said he was in favor of abortion rights, he doesn't say that, he says a woman's right to choose, there was cheers. Now, people at Liberty said, oh, no, that wasn't any of our students, that was just Bernie Sanders. He had a group of people that came in and they were cheering. Okay. When he said something about same-sex marriage, more cheers. So here's the point. When you do something like that, under the guise of being open and everything, you need to be very, very careful if you don't want to leave the wrong impression, because I can tell you, looking at the left-wing Facebook people and the left-wing bloggers and the Bernie Sanders supporters, they were all out there saying, hey, look at this, Liberty's breaking down. They were saying it. We got Liberty on the ropes now. The rest of them will fall pretty soon, too. And then there was a former graduate of Liberty, made sure that in the article that he wrote, that, or the little audio thing he put up, hey, I have 2 degrees from Liberty, and I support Bernie Sanders. Because Bernie Sanders wants to enact justice like Jesus talks about in Luke chapter 4. And again, it's this left-wing leftism seeping into the church, and it's overwhelming people's belief systems. It is a religion. It is a very powerful religion. Now look, we know in the end times that there are 2 major players that come on the scene. One, of course, is the Antichrist, and you'll be able to identify him when he goes into the temple of God and commits the abomination of desolation, and the false prophet. Now, I think there's some confusion sometimes, and look, we can argue about it. It's not something we divide over. Some people say there's one beast, Antichrist, and that's it. But when you look at the description in Revelation 17, what do you see here? You see, he carried me away to windless, and verse 3 of 17, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, okay? The woman represents the false religious system, the false prophet. And the beast represents the Antichrist. So one way to understand these passages, which are difficult to understand, I'll admit that, is the beast is not the woman, and the woman is not the beast. So don't put them together. They're different entities. They are a false religious system that the Antichrist will use to cement his rise to power. And then it tells us later on in those passages that when he's done with the religion, the religious system that has helped foster his rise to power, he'll destroy it. But what does he do? He doesn't get rid of the false prophet. The false prophet's all the way around until Jesus comes back, and both are thrown alive into the lake of fire. So what does that tell me? Here's my reasoning, okay? Yeah, if you disagree with it, please, be sure to post on our YouTube channel, because I know you will anyway. What I see from that is my thinking is that the false prophet is as much of a poser as the Antichrist. The Antichrist will look at this, be appealing to all men, and the false prophet will head up a world religious system that the Antichrist uses, but in the end, you will find that this religion, that he's really a poser too. Because when the Antichrist destroys that false religion, false prophet's still around. And from what I can see, still helping out the beast, the Antichrist. Now again, as I said, not dogmatic about this, I could be wrong, but I'm only suggesting to you is that we're going to see something unfold in D.C. this week that's very interesting. Because I do not trust Francis. And I showed you the cover of Newsweek last week where I think this might be going with him. He might just be sort of a precursor to that, he might actually be the false prophet. But what is one of the characteristics of Francis that's very interesting? What is his core system really? Is it Catholicism? It's leftism. Does he share that with someone he might meet at the White House this week? I'm not drawing any conclusions. I'm not setting any dates. I'm just saying it's something that you should think about and consider. Because ultimately, my view, Francis uses Catholicism as a prop to further his leftist agenda. And he is deeply schooled in liberation theology. That's not Christianity. It's not Catholicism. It's leftism. And it seems, if I recall correctly, that the person in the White House that he will meet, who one questioner thinks is a Muslim, but I also remember that he went to a church that was based on and seeped with what? Liberation theology. So there is a unity there. So Francis is upset with Obama, but Francis, at the same time that this is going on, where they object to the people who are invited to the White House, he is also liberalizing things with regard to marriage and that type of thing, how to get a divorce and that type of thing in Catholicism. It's a very interesting convergence. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out. It's just something that, as I analyze the scriptures, I'm engaging in some speculation as to how they might play out. I'm not wedded to that. I know that things change very quickly. In fact, in the Jerusalem Post the other day, there was a very interesting editorial, and it talked about the Oslo Accords. I mentioned this last week. It was actually, this week was the anniversary, the 22nd anniversary of the signing of this thing with Yasser Arafat, Yitzhak Rabin of Israel, Yasser Arafat representing the Palestinian group, and Hillary's husband in the middle on the White House lawn. And Shimon Peres actually wrote a book about this called The New Middle East, where he said, hey, it's a bright, glorious future. He sounds like a dominionist, these people who think we're going to build the kingdom of God. And I hear these people, I see what they write a lot, and they're like, it's getting better, look at how great it's going to be. And I'm like, really, are you living in the world that I'm living in? Really? Look around. It's not getting better. At least it doesn't appear that from where I sit. So anyway, so this writer, I think his name is Lior Ackerman. He was a brigadier general in the IDF and was actually a head of a division of the Mossad. And he writes this. When Shimon Peres wrote his book, The New Middle East, in 1993, he was not imagining a world like we're currently living in today. Peres's vision was not based on data or any familiarity with the religious groups or nations that surround us. In other words, he didn't know what he was talking about. I think that's a nice way of saying that. It did not focus on specifics such as borders, relationships, tourism, economy, and mutual prosperity. Innocently enough, Peres thought that if Mahmoud Abbas was ready to sign the Oslo Accords, then this also meant that the Palestinian leaders and Arab states were open to carrying out real change. He certainly didn't foresee the murderous barbarians who, in the name of radical Islam, are now taking over the Middle East with no one to stop them. He should have. They're right under his nose. 22 years later, we are now in the year 2015, and lo and behold, we are living in a new Middle East. And there's also a new Africa, and a new Europe, and a new United States. The dream Peres had about secure borders, peaceful relations, a thriving tourism sector, and strong economy has been shattered. Instead of an Arab Spring, we are experiencing a global winter. This is a very excellent article. I think it was in Friday's Jerusalem Post. For years now, the UN has been almost openly anti-Semitic and flagrantly prejudiced as it unabashedly promotes policies that harm the state of Israel. This can be seen in every decision and condemnation the UN has been made over the years. Why is the UN so obsessed about every little incident that happens over the Green Line in Israel? That's the area, the border that Israel's not supposed to cross. but manages to completely ignore the genocide taking place just across the Syrian border and the terrorist activity being carried out by Iran and ISIS. Instead of using their energy and resources to promote UN resolutions that would combat ISIS' murderous takeover of huge sections of Iraq and Syria, and instead of fighting against Hezbollah, which has turned an entire state into its own private training field, the Europeans prefer to spend their time marking Israeli products that were manufactured over the Green Line, boycotting Israeli academics, and hosting hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees, among whom are hundreds of ISIS activists. The EU has no idea what it is getting itself into. So what did we end up with in the end? The Middle East has completely lost its old shape and form. Borders are moving, regimes are crumbling, and entire ethnic groups are being forced out of their homelands by violent interlopers. Europe is currently undergoing huge changes as hundreds of thousands of Muslim refugees flood the country and radical Islam becomes more widespread. Russia is reestablishing control over lands that were not too long ago were part of the Soviet Union, and the British are busy pretending that it is not being affected by activity on the mainland. The Americans are busy with domestic and economic issues and are hoping with all their might that the nightmares taking place around them will all be gone by the morning. The entire world is undergoing extensive changes, and you think I'm a bummer, a downer. But this guy's a realist. He sees what's going on. The entire world is undergoing extensive changes, and nothing will ever be the same again. In this world of chaos where people don't realize the ramifications of current events, the people of Israel should not expect any help, support, or understanding from outsiders. That, my friends, is directly out of the pages of the prophetic scriptures in the Bible. Israel will be encompassed about. Israel will be isolated. The Jewish people will be persecuted. The entire world is changing right before our eyes. Not only are we experiencing a new Middle East, but we are watching an entirely new world form right in front of our eyes. It's certainly not going to be boring. And then there were these numerous articles this week about what's going on in Syria. In the New York Times yesterday, they had a graphic on their one of their pages, or the other day, about that. You can't see it in the screen resolution, but that sort of tan area, like a big bar chart, is made up of little tiny dots. And it has over 200,000 dots, each one representing a Syrian that's been killed since the start of the Syrian war 4 years ago. That's probably low. That bar chart may need to be 50% larger. There may be over 300,000 people that have been killed. It's a stunning number. And when you see these pictures of things coming out of Syria, this is a picture taken a couple years ago. I forget where it is. I think it was up around Homs or Aleppo. The destruction in city after city and town after town and village after village and neighborhood after neighborhood in Syria is absolutely stunning. It's no wonder that they're gone. 4 million or more, 4 or 5 million have gone to the surrounding countries. Internally, an additional 11 or 12 million are displaced. So 11 or 12 million plus 4 or 5 million, that gives you 16 to 17 million people displaced from where they were 4 years ago, out of a population when the war began of 21 million people. Imagine, put that in scope of the United States, where we have, 350 million people? What's 80% of our population, or 85% of our population? I mean, imagine the gravity of the situation. And it's just not Syria. It's Yemen. It's Iraq. It's unbelievable what's going on. And so these things, these pictures that you see of things coming out of the Middle East, these refugees, Germany now wants mandatory quotas to deal with refugees. Just a week ago, they said, hey, we'll take up to 1 million this year. Oops, that changed. You understand how quickly, the interesting thing about this is how quickly the world changes. I mean, 4 years ago, this was not happening. I don't have the clip in my presentation this week, but remember the clip that I've played for you many times of Richard Engel, the chief war correspondent for NBC News, being interviewed by Brian Williams, back in April of 2011. And he says, Richard, you've been over there in the Middle East. You've seen the beginning of this Arab Spring. What do you think? Well, I think, they're going to be trying to make peace and all this stuff. And then there's the Israel problem. And he concluded with that segment with, eventually, I think this whole thing ends up in Jerusalem. That's right out of the pages of Bible prophecy. I'm sure Richard Engel doesn't have a clue as to what he said, but it's very significant. And in the 4 years since he said that, has it gotten more apparent or less apparent that it's going to end up in Jerusalem? Well, what I'm going to show you from this week, it's probably more apparent. But look at these pictures of people on the border coming across in Croatia. People storming the border, and now when Hungary closed its borders, they built a wall. So people, they stopped coming across the Hungary border. Now they go to Croatia. Croatia puts up barriers. Now they're going to Serbia. This is a human wave of people. There are talks that it's not 4 million people. This is just the first wave of maybe 35 million people that are on the move to come to Europe. And I don't think I have I'm going to say that a lot today, I don't think I have the clip of the analysis of this that I saw one of the security experts on Fox News saying, look, when this comes about, when we're bringing in immigrants, we made mistakes when we evaluated 64 people. And Obama's taking 10 or 40,000. Gee, what's the number of mistakes are going to be made then? And Germany, they cannot process it. They cannot handle it. Here's a little report from NBC Nightly News the other night.
A new front has opened in Europe's worsening humanitarian crisis. Hungary was able to stop the human tide crossing its border with a fence, tear gas, water cannons, and police clubs. But thousands of men, women, and children seeking a safer existence didn't turn back. They just found a new border to cross. And another country has now become a flashpoint in all this. A report from Keir Simmons.
They fight to board a bus, handing their children overhead. The desperation is all too familiar. But the setting is new. This is Croatia. Fearing that Europe's doors are closing, migrants and refugees climb through windows of buses and trains. We want to go! We want to go! And at the station, more people waiting to head north.
They have to find a way to help us, not to prison us.
Fighting breaks out, the tension too much for people who feel increasingly trapped. This is terrible, a local Croatian woman says. We used to be refugees too. Hundreds of thousands have made the journey this year, from Turkey to Greece, Macedonia, Serbia, Hungary and Austria, Germany and beyond. But with Hungary's border with Serbia now fenced off, the human tide has been diverted to Croatia. More than 17,000 reportedly crossing that border in just 3 days. At first, Croatia welcomed the refugees, but now it says it is overwhelmed. We have shown our heart, the Prime Minister said today. We also need to show we have a brain.
Stop! Sit down! Sit down!
His police have faced crowds, panicking, pushing to get on buses. By the side of the road, a man collapses, a suspected heart attack. His wife and sons look on. An ambulance takes him to the hospital, where he recovered, alive, but one of thousands whose hopes for a better life are slipping away. Keir Simmons, NBC News, London.
And what they're finding out is EU figures are out, and 4 out of 5 of the migrants they're found are not even Syrian. How about that? I don't know if I have the article or not. Again, I was putting this together literally up until the last minute because there was so much this week to sift through. But go back to the end of the beginning, before World War II actually started. What happened in Europe? Germany had risen to power, the Nazi Party, and they had a pogrom, to rid Europe of Jews. And what did the Jews do? Now, there's a thing that we talk about in the world called normalcy bias, and it's very powerful. And I fall into it too. You think things will, your normalcy bias means you think things will never change. It's always going to be like this. It's always going to be Mayberry in America, right? It's on TV, but it's not. And it changes, and the fact that people can't get rid of their normalcy bias means that they miss things. So what happened to a lot of Jews was they saw the people being carted off and never coming back. And they thought, well, we'll work with the system and it'll get better. Eventually, they figured out we have to leave. And so they tried to emigrate out of Europe, even within Europe. And what happened? Country after country after country after country refused them the opportunity. And millions of Jews were killed, slaughtered, gassed, shot in the ovens, Auschwitz, Birkenau, all the Nazi death camps, Treblinka. Can I suggest something to you? God is very serious about his special relationship with the Jewish people. And what you may be seeing now and what's descending on Europe, I cannot discount the possibility or the probability that this is payback to Europe for what they did to the Jews a generation ago. I would suggest to you that it probably is. That's my view. Well, what's going on with these refugees? There was a address the other September 11th at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and just keep the audio down on this because it's in Arabic and none of us have good Arabic. Here's the preacher. The infidels want us to be tormented. They want us to be humiliated. The Quran says the Jews and the Christians will never be pleased with you, but we will never follow their religion. This dark night will be over. And soon we will trample them underfoot, Allah willing. Germany is not a compassionate country. That wishes to absorb refugees from Syria and Iraq, and Palestinian refugees in the Levant and elsewhere. Europe has become old and decrepit and needs human reinforcement. No force is more powerful than the human force of us Muslims. Oh, Muslims, the Germans say in their economic reports that they need 50,000 young workers. Now they have got 20,000 and they want another 30,000 and more to work in their factories. They are not motivated by compassion for the Levant, its people, and its refugees. Throughout Europe, all the hearts are infused with hatred towards Muslims. They wish that we were dead, but they have lost their fertility. You must have listened to the prophecy update last week. So they look for fertility in our midst. We will give them fertility. We will breed children with them. Because we shall conquer their countries. Whether you like it or not, oh Germans, oh Americans, oh French, oh Italians, and all those like you, take the refugees. We shall soon collect them in the name of the coming caliphate. We will say to you, these are our sons. Send them, or we will send our armies to you. In other words, this is a form of jihad. Bill Warner at politicalislam.org has a great video out about migration is jihad. You should go look it up and watch it. And so here's Europe. They're hand-wringing. What do we do? These nightmare on the Migrant Express. People at Dunkirk, Calais, wanting to get across the English Channel. One was electrocuted yesterday trying to get on the train that goes through the Channel from France to England. Europe they're shutting their borders. Headlines in the Daily Mail the other day. Hungary, Australia, Slovakia, and Holland have shut their borders. People are desperately trying to get in. There's all these pictures of people. And then here the headline from the Washington Post yesterday or today, Syria migrants cut new paths through Europe. Even Der Spiegel has this interesting article, the German publication, and this is a translation from the German, so I'm trusting that someone translated it. But this was in their magazine this week. An exodus of tens of thousands is hemorrhaging out of Syria and into Europe. After 4 years of civil war horrors, people have given up completely on their country. Is there a shred of hope left for stopping the conflict and rebuilding? And they show these pictures throughout the article of these cities in Syria. I mean, would you stay for that? Really? Country is hemorrhaging people. Hundreds of thousands of Syrians are on the road, traveling to Germany, Sweden, and the Netherlands, where they have already arrived, and millions will follow suit. The exodus is putting a long-ignored question back onto the political agenda in the West. What can be done to stop the horrors in Syria? And there's picture after picture in this article of these just devastated cities. 4 years after the beginning of the uprising, 250,000 are dead, and the political proposals by the United Nations, the German foreign minister, the United States government, and others sound very much like proposals in 2011. Negotiate, apply pressure, and seek a political solution. But what do they overlook is that the overwhelming majority of Syrians are not fleeing from ISIS, the Islamic State, but from Assad's barrel bombs, the Syrian Air Force, and the generally hopeless situation. The gradual dissolution of Syria makes it extremely difficult to find a solution for the entire country. It may simply be too late for Syria. The hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees apparently agree. It is often overlooked that their exodus to Europe has only just begun. Many Syrians were already leaving the country before, but now everyone wants to leave. The wars for control over the decaying country make a peaceful solution virtually impossible. These wars know no borders, as evidenced by ISIS' campaign of conquest in Iraq and Ankara's fight against the PKK. The longer of all this lasts, the more difficult it will be to stop Syria's demise. And the longer the hundreds of thousands who have left remain in exile, the more likely they are to return. A bombed city can be rebuilt, but a destroyed country abandoned by those who want to live a life of dignity, work, and raise children is a different story. Now, he ignores some of the other factors that are going on here. Here's James Clapper, the director of intelligence, speaking at a security conference last week, where he discusses Syria in response to a question.
What are your concerns with the mass Syrian refugee situation on the different countries throughout Europe, economically, national security-wise, culturally, et cetera? And I guess I just would, to add something to that, would be how do we know what kind of people are going to Europe in this refugee flow?
Well, it is, getting to be in its totality, a disaster of biblical proportions. If just look at Syria alone, where there are in excess of 4 million people that have left Syria, and another 11 million that have been internally displaced. And of course, humanitarian situation internal to Syria is a disaster. And so what this has caused, obviously, is this urge to go somewhere, anywhere, where there's some hope of their life improving. And of course, as they descend on Europe, one of the obvious issues that we worry about, and in turn, as we bring refugees to this country, is exactly what their background. We don't obviously put it past the likes of ISIL to infiltrate operatives among these refugees. So that is a huge concern of ours. We do have a pretty aggressive program for those coming to this country for screening their backgrounds. I am not as uniformly confident as about each European country that is going to be faced with welcoming or allowing refugees into their country. So this is a huge issue for all kinds of reasons. The security implications are just one small part of it, but the economic, the social impacts are huge.
In the Jerusalem Post, Sarah Honing wrote this the other day, yet another idealistic idiocy. And she used the picture of this guy who pulled his wife onto the tracks. Remember, we showed you the video of that last week, that it was all staged, it was fake, that type of thing. And she mentions this. I guess I did put this in. In 1938, when German concentration camps already operated, Jewish heads were busted in the streets, Jewish businesses were vandalized, Jewish property was robbed, Jewish books were burned, Jewish children were kicked out of school, and all Jews had to don yellow star patches. Put upon representatives of the world's democracies conferred on Lake Geneva's French shore to deliberate what to do about the bothersome refugees, whom they expressly refrained from calling Jews lest they offend them. And then they went on. England refused them. France, everybody refused these refugees who were fleeing literally for their lives in supposedly compassionate Europe. To be sure, the world's holier-than-thou hypocrites have no more sympathy for Jews in our day. The only difference is that we are independent in our own historic homeland. That's why we can never remotely countenance the notion of endangering our precarious self-determination by allowing even limited entry, whatever limited means, to an enemy population. There's a lot of criticism. Well, Israel's not taking any of these refugees. Well, none of the other Arab countries are either, even the wealthy oil states. Our overriding rationale is to never again become refugees ourselves. We can take it for granted that no kindness would be shown us in tragic circumstances. Rather than to curry favor with enduringly ill-intentioned world opinion, Herzog, he's a left-wing Labor Party leader in Israel, would do well to memorize what his party's founding father, David Ben-Gurion, said to the civilized nations, in scare quotes, in 1942. Ben-Gurion said this: "As long as the bias against the Jewish people continues, we will not believe the sincerity of your pronouncements about justice, freedom, and truth." And that's even more true today. So in our world, Iran is to be sanctioned? No. What are we going to do, though? We're going to boycott Israel. That's good. And we have this thing here. Now I'm going to have to skip through because now I couldn't find my slides when I was doing this. So let me move forward. They even went to see Lech Walesa, the head of Solidarity in Poland. And this is in the Jerusalem Post. There are a lot of articles in Jerusalem Post this week. He says this: "I understand," interview with Lech Walesa, who's retired now, "I understand why they fear their influx. They arrive from places where people are beheaded. We are worried that the same will happen to us. We in Poland have small flats, low salaries, and meager pensions. Watching the refugees on television, I notice that they look better than us. They are well-fed, well-dressed, and maybe even richer than we are. It's a problem. If Europe opens its gates, soon millions will come through, and while living among us," it's always interesting when these guys retire, then they get honest. "If Europe opens its gates, soon millions will come through, and while living among us will start exercising their own customs, including beheading. Unfortunately, Europe is still not unified. And each country in the EU has its own interest and agenda. Boy, that's becoming even more apparent by the day. My advice is that we, mainly the rich nations like Germany, help them financially to create jobs, for example, in their countries of origin." And he's right. And so these people continue to come. You see the signs, you see the people handing their children off to strangers to take them, walking through open fields. crossing over you know how hard it is to get over a barrier like that, and they're desperate. They're going to get where they're going to go. They talked about the crisis of Arab civilization in another article in the Jerusalem Post this week. The proud heirs, quoting Bernard Lewis, from what went wrong 20 years ago. The proud heirs of ancient civilizations had got used to hiring Western firms to carry out tasks that their own contractors and technicians were apparently not capable of doing. Following is bad enough, limping in the rear is far worse. By all the standards that matter in the modern world, what was once a mighty civilization has indeed fallen low. They can't even do their own stuff, is what he's saying. Let's see. So that's the serious situation in the refugees. Melanie Phillips also has an article when she moves over to the Iran situation. And what she did was she went and dug out some court documents on file. You can get them online from the federal court in Southern District of New York in Manhattan, talking about, guess what? Who was involved in 9/11? Iran. At least that's what the court documents say and what the judge found when he said things would be imposed, but the president doesn't care about that. And so the question now becomes, if Iran cheats, can Israel still strike? And they talk about the Israeli military option. We don't have time to go into that today. And then he's coming to the UN to give a speech, and he says, we'll drop a bombshell at the end of the speech. A lot of speculation as to what that is. Mahmoud Abbas, head of the Palestinians, he's retiring, and so he's going to do something spectacular on his way out. What it is, I don't know. Suggestion is he will tear up the Oslo Accords. There are other suggestions. I'll give you one in a moment. For who this guy is, he was one of the main masterminds behind this incident. You remember that picture? I'll bet I don't even have to tell you, anyone, what that is. That's a Palestinian standing out the Israeli dormitory at the 1972 Munich Olympics when 11 or 13 Israeli Jews were massacred. But this is the guy, Mahmoud Abbas. Now you need to listen to what he says when he comes to the UN. This is what he said on Palestinian TV just a few days ago. Everybody is asking what we should do. We will knock on all possible doors in order to make the voice of Jerusalem heard. Onward we go, Allah willing. We salute you and all the men and women in Rabat. We salute every drop of blood spilled for the sake of Jerusalem. This blood is clean, pure blood, shed for the sake of Allah, Allah willing. Every martyr will be placed in paradise, and all the wounded will be rewarded by Allah. Dear brothers, we are all here for the sake of Jerusalem. I tell you in all honesty, a Palestinian state without Jerusalem will never be. The Palestinian state must include its capital, noble Jerusalem. With its capital, East Jerusalem, which was occupied in 1967, we do not allow any of their measures. All these divisions at Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre are ours. They are all ours, and they have no right to defile them with their filthy feet. We shall not allow them to do so, and we shall do whatever we can to protect Jerusalem. I think there's a blogger in Israel, calls herself Grandma Settler, and she writes some pretty good stuff. She suggests that what Abbas is going to do is he's going to insist that we'll accept the Palestinian state within the prior borders. Now, this is what Israel looked like in 1947. The green area was given over to the Arab state known as Palestine. Well, really, it was really, the Gaza part was part of Egypt. The other part was part of Jordan. There was really no Palestinian state. In 1949, armistice with everybody. The Arab area had shrunk. Israel had taken over some additional land. And then after the 67 war, of course, they took control, or they've given control of parts of the Gaza and what they call the West Bank. Really, this pink area here is the biblical heartland of Israel. That's where when Abraham came into the country, that's where he was in the hill country there, known as Judea and Samaria, biblically. I even saw one person say, oh, well, listen, it's no big deal. Israel can defend. They won the 67 war when their borders were even smaller than they are now, or what's proposed, so what's the big deal? Here's a video from the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs about defensible borders.
Every state has the right of self-defense and to secure borders to protect itself from hostile invasions and terror. Israel is a small state surrounded by Arab countries 650 times its size, some of which are large bases of global terror. Only 44 miles separate between the Jordan Valley and the Mediterranean Sea. After the Six-Day War in 1967, when Israel was attacked by 4 armies on 3 fronts, United Nations Security Council Resolution 242 stated that Israel was entitled to new defensible borders to replace the previous fragile lines from which it was attacked. What are Israel's defensible borders? What are its essential security needs? The Jordan Rift Valley, Israel's eastern frontier, forms a natural barrier between Israel and the countries of Jordan, Iraq, and Iran. The Jordan Valley rises from an area that is 1,200 feet below sea level to a hilly ridge of up to 3,000 feet, creating a steep 4,200-foot virtual wall opposite any force attacking from the east. The growing threat of global jihad activity near Israel's borders requires it to prevent infiltrations of terrorists and weapons. When Israel left the Philadelphia corridor in Gaza, it became a highway for the infiltration of terrorists and the flow of hundreds of tons of ammunition and weaponry from all over the Arab world aimed at Israeli civilians. The Jordan Valley is the equivalent of Gaza's Philadelphia corridor in the West Bank. To defend itself, Israel must retain control over the Jordan Valley. This is Israel's mountain ridge, rising up to 3,000 feet. It dominates Israel's major coastal cities, where more than 70% of its population, 80% of its industry, and all of its airfields and seaports are located. Missiles launched from the Judean hills pose an immediate threat to Jerusalem, Israel's capital. Israel's only international airport, Ben Gurion, would be in the range of even primitive rockets, while all planes taking off and landing would be threatened by shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles. More advanced weaponry would be able to hit virtually any point in Israel. If Israel were forced back to the 1949 armistice lines, the Green Line, the country's width would be reduced to a narrow 9-mile waistline that would be impossible to defend. That's why any future arrangement must include Israeli control over key areas of the mountain ridge and a demilitarized Palestinian state.
Well, you can look up and see the rest of that online. Now, you need to know, that video is about 5 years old. I've played it here before, so I think it's only gotten a little bit more desperate. And we know this from what we said last week, that Israel's going to be a cup of trembling under all nations. So let's look at one more thing this week. I'm going to skip, I have a video, maybe I'll play it next week, of the Ayatollah Khamenei saying, in the big rally this week, death to Israel, death to America, death to England, death to infidels, etc., on and on, death to everybody. And they say death doesn't mean death, it just means, we don't want you to prevail because you're dead. I don't know why they say it, but young Palestinians rioting on the Temple Mount. This was Jewish feast weeks, Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur is this week. That's the 23rd, when the Pope's going to be at the White House. Saudi Arabia said, hands off Al-Aqsa. There's been clashes within within Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Temple Mount's been closed. There were a lot of Jewish worshipers who wanted to go up there on Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, and, this was a staged thing by the Palestinians. They planned this uprising. A lot of people think it's serious enough that this could be the beginning of a third intifada. There's a lot we could say about that this may be a trigger for a Psalm 83 war. At the same time that this is going on, we have Russia has put ground troops, supplies, fighter jets, huge military aircraft. They've got their largest nuclear submarine on its way to the Mediterranean. Should arrive shortly. 200 nuclear warheads on that thing. Russia's arming itself to the teeth in the Middle East. Now our president is saying, well, maybe we can talk to Russia about working together against, because Russia wants to prop up Assad, and they're going in, we're the great savior. And the Russians are masters of deception. Boy, they are the world champions in this. If it was an Olympic sport, they would win the gold every time. And they're going, we're trying to help Assad and get rid of these evil Muslim terrorists and help the Syrian people so they don't want to immigrate. And really what they're doing is they're projecting power because of the pipelines. There's a lot of things going on. I suspect they'll go into Egypt soon too, because Egypt just found massive gas fields. And Russia went in and offered Netanyahu, supposedly it says, secretly offered to protect Israel's gas fields and even build a pipeline up to Europe for the sale of Israeli gas, which the Russians will get their cut out of course. This is a picture in the old city of Jerusalem, pipe bombs. Here's a little, just sort of what's going on on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, this 35-acre enclave, the largest building platform in antiquity. Of course, we have the Dome of the Rock. The mosque, it's called the Mosque of Omar. It's not really a mosque. It's a commemorative building. And then Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is considered to be the third holiest site in Islam. Interestingly enough, it does not point towards Mecca, but that's a topic for another time. Here's some pictures of some of the things going on this week on the Temple Mount. This is on getting ready for a Jewish festival. This is Al-Aqsa Mosque. I've actually been, back when we were there 20 years ago, you could still go in it. We went in there and we went in the Dome of the Rock. And so I can verify that I remember it very vividly, what it looked like. They have these protests all the time whenever Jewish worshipers want to go up there. You're not allowed to pray. If you lead a hymn up there, you'll get arrested. The Muslim police will come out immediately after you. And then we see here, you see the rocks inside this third holiest place of Islam. They're barricading it and they've got rocks. And let me tell you, those rocks, you get hit with them. There was a guy who got hit by rocks in the Palestinian area this week, an Israeli, and he's dead. Because these are rocks. So here's a little bit better graphic I got from the Consul General in Philadelphia, Israeli Consul General, and you can see that visitors walk up here, and then they come in here and you ascend to the top there by the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then you walk up here and you can walk down steps towards the Dome of the Rock, and then walk down here towards the south. This direction is north, this is west. Of course, here's the Western Wall, and then the Mount of Olives is over there to the east, and the Kidron Valley is in between. All of these have important aspects coming in Bible prophecy. And you come up this ramp here and come in, and at least when we were there a few years ago, you cannot go into the mosque anymore. Here's some more pictures of some stuff going on. You hear the stun grenades being fired by the Israeli police. These are really riots that are taking place. And if you've been there when it's peaceful, it's a very Palm Place. But look, it was Jewish feast days, and this was all staged to take advantage of that and to make a point. In a second here, you'll see what goes on. I think I have some video of what goes on inside the mosque. But here we go. See how the entrance is barricaded? And here's inside. This is inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
صاروا مسكرين ابوابها. الله اكبر ولله الحمد.
Well, you can see there's plenty of videos online. You can watch what was going on. It's now they're saying they invaded, but these are pictures that were taken inside the mosque prior to. I didn't know they had rocks in their worship in Islam. It's news to me. Actually, they do throw stones at the devil on the Hajj, which starts pretty soon here in Saudi Arabia. In fact, there was one thing. A top Iranian space scientist was among those killed in the Mecca crane collapse. And then, of course, Khomeini said this: Israel will no longer exist in 25 years. So, interesting stuff. This Iranian thing is very troubling. He was on, I could play the video of him. I'm going to play one clip and finish, and then we'll wrap up. This was Marco Rubio on the floor of the Senate the other day, speaking about the Iranian problem.
Mr. President.
The senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I'll be brief. I know the senator from Tennessee would like to close on this matter. I think everything that needs to be said about the details of this deal have already been said. I do want to be recorded for history's purposes before I know what is going to happen in regards to this if it goes through. Iran will immediately use the money that it's receiving in sanctions relief to begin to build up its conventional capabilities. It will establish the most dominant military power in the region outside of the United States, and it will raise the price of us operating in the region. They're going to build anti-access capabilities, rockets capable of destroying our aircraft carriers and ships, continue to build these swift boats that are able to come on us, these fast boats that are able to swarm our naval assets. And they'll make it harder and harder for U.S. troops to be in the region. They'll also work with other terrorist groups in the region to target American servicemen and women. And they may or may not deny that they're involved, but they will target us and raise the price of our presence in the Middle East until they hope to completely pull us out of that region. They'll also continue to build long-range missiles, missiles capable of reaching the United States. Those are not affected by this deal, and they'll continue to build them as they've been doing. And then at some point in the near future, when the time is right, they will build a nuclear weapon. And they will do so because at that point they will know that they have become immune, that we will no longer be able to strike their nuclear program because the price of doing so will be too high. This is not just a work of imagination. It exists in the world today. It's called North Korea, where a lunatic possesses dozens of nuclear weapons and a long-range rocket that can already reach the United States. And we cannot do anything about it. An attack on North Korea today would result in an attack on Tokyo, or Seoul, or Guam, or Hawaii, or California. And so the world must now live with a lunatic in possession of nuclear weapons. And this is the goal Iran has as well, to reach a point where they become immune to any sort of credible military threat because the price of a military strike would be too high. And then they become an established nuclear weapons power. And never in the history of the world has such a regime ever possessed weapons so capable of destruction. Iran is led by a supreme leader who is a radical Shia cleric with an apocalyptic vision of the future. He is not a traditional geopolitical actor who makes decisions on the basis of borders or simply history or because of ambitions. He has an religious apocalyptic vision of the future, one that calls for triggering a conflict between the non-Muslim world and the Muslim world, one that he feels especially obligated to trigger. and he's going to possess nuclear weapons, this is the world that we are on the verge of leaving our children to inherit. And perhaps we ourselves will have to share in it. And so I want to be recorded for history's purposes, if nothing else, to say that those of us who opposed this deal understood where it would lead. And we are making a terrible mistake. And I fear that a passage of this deal will make it even harder for us to prevent it. And I hope that there is still time to change our minds, but here's the good news. Iran may have a supreme leader, but America does not. In this nation, we have a republic. And soon we will have new leaders, perhaps in this chamber, but also in the executive branch. And I pray that on their first day in office, they will reverse this deal and reimpose the sanctions and back them up with a credible threat of military force, or history will condemn us for not doing what needed to be done at this critical moment in the world's history. I yield the floor.
Okay. Well, look, significant, yeah, very good speech. So it's the same thing I say every week, watch out, pay attention, look up, share the gospel, get your lives in order. It's the same message every week. And it's probably going to be the same message each week. I do appreciate you letting me go over for a change. And we need to, but look, at least today, you know that when you get to the buffet, the Baptists and Methodists will all be gone already because they got out of church and they've already eaten. So we won't have to wait in line. So look, it's serious time, folks, in world history, prophetic history. And we're looking for ultimately the coming King. That's the hope of glory that we have, to be with him, finally, our Savior. So let's pray. Lord, again, bless us as we go this week. Lord, help us to be infused with their Spirit. Give us a boldness to take a stand in our faith, even though it might cost. Help us share our faith with our friends and neighbors, even though it might cost. And Lord, I just pray that you would pour out your Spirit on us and that you would work in the hearts of people that we'll encounter this week, that you would prepare them for the truth of the gospel that might be shared with them. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.